The alarm screamed through the small bridge of the Nightingale, and Jake Morrison nearly spilled his coffee across the navigation console. He slammed the cup down and checked the sensors, his experienced eyes scanning the readout with practiced efficiency. A distress signal, weak but unmistakable, pulsed from somewhere near the asteroid field ahead. "Lucas, you seeing this?" Jake called to his second-in-command, who was running diagnostics in the engine room. Lucas Bennett's voice crackled through the intercom. "Yeah, boss. Looks like someone's having a bad day out there. You want to check it out?" Jake hesitated. The Nightingale was a merchant vessel, not a warship. They carried medical supplies and electronic components, nothing worth dying for, but nothing that would help much in a fight either. Getting involved in someone else's trouble was a good way to end up floating in space with a hull full of holes. But the signal was desperate. Whoever was out there needed help badly. "Change course. Let's see what we're dealing with," Jake said, already knowing his crew would think he was crazy. The Nightingale moved closer, her engines humming as they navigated around spinning chunks of rock. What Jake saw made his stomach tighten. A sleek vessel, clearly expensive and bearing markings he recognized as Kryn Empire design, drifted in space. Scorch marks covered its hull, and atmosphere vented from at least 3 breaches. Worse, 3 smaller ships circled it like sharks, their weapons still hot from recent firing. Pirates. Of course it was pirates. "Boss, we should turn around right now," Lucas said, having made his way to the bridge. His face was pale as he stared at the scene. "Those are Razor Clan markings. They don't take prisoners, and they sure as hell don't ignore witnesses." Jake's hands moved across the controls, bringing the Nightingale's minimal weapons online. 2 plasma cannons and a missile launcher. Against 3 pirate vessels, it was almost laughable. "Get Helen up here and tell her to prep the medical bay. And strap in, because this is going to get rough," Jake said calmly. Lucas opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He'd been flying with Jake for 5 years. He knew that tone. When Jake Morrison made up his mind, mountain ranges had an easier time moving. The Nightingale dove toward the damaged Kryn ship, and the pirates noticed immediately. One of them peeled off to intercept, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Jake waited until the last possible second, then fired the port maneuvering thruster at full blast. The Nightingale spun like a dancer, and Jake's perfectly timed shot caught the pirate vessel square in the engine housing. It exploded in a brilliant flash of orange and white. "One down," Jake muttered, already plotting his next move. The other 2 pirates were more cautious now, splitting up to attack from different angles. Jake pushed the Nightingale into a rolling dive that would have made a combat pilot proud. Missiles streaked past where they'd been moments before, detonating harmlessly against an asteroid. "Helen, I hope that medical bay is ready," Jake called out. "Ready, but I'd prefer not to use it on us," Dr. Helen Carter replied sharply. Jake grinned despite the danger. He lined up another shot, but this time he wasn't aiming at the pirates. Instead, he targeted a medium-sized asteroid, hitting it with both plasma cannons. The rock shattered, sending debris flying in all directions. One large chunk slammed into the nearest pirate ship, crumpling its forward section like paper. The last pirate decided that whatever salvage the Kryn ship offered wasn't worth dealing with a crazy human pilot. It turned and fled into the asteroid field, disappearing among the rocks. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Lucas, get a boarding tube ready. We need to check that Kryn ship for survivors." They maneuvered carefully alongside the damaged vessel. The hull was cold, most systems offline. Lucas suited up and crossed through the boarding tube while Jake monitored from the Nightingale. Minutes felt like hours as they waited. "Got 1 survivor," Lucas's voice crackled through. "Female, Kryn species, badly injured. Jake, her clothing has royal insignia. I think we just rescued someone important." They brought her aboard carefully. She was unconscious, her blue-tinted skin pale from blood loss. Helen immediately went to work, her hands steady as she treated the wounds. The Kryn woman's breathing was shallow but regular. Jake examined the royal insignia on her torn garments. A crown over crossed stars. He'd seen enough Kryn news broadcasts to know what that meant. This wasn't just some minor noble. This was someone from the imperial family itself. "Get us to the nearest Kryn outpost, Fastest route possible, Jake ordered. The journey took 6 hours. During that time, Helen worked tirelessly to stabilize their patient. The Kryn woman woke briefly, her golden eyes focusing on Jake with confusion and something that might have been gratitude before she slipped back into unconscious rest. When they arrived at the outpost, Kryn military ships surrounded them immediately. Admiral Chen himself came aboard, his expression shifting from suspicion to shock when he saw their passenger. "Princess Arya," he breathed. "You saved Princess Arya Velshera, heir to the throne." They wanted to keep Jake there, to honor him, to reward him. The Admiral spoke of medals and payments and formal recognition. Jake refused it all politely but firmly. He'd done what any decent person would do. The princess was safe. That was payment enough. As the Nightingale departed, Jake looked back at the outpost one last time. Through the viewport, he could see the princess being carried away on a medical stretcher, surrounded by guards and officials. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and she raised one hand in a small gesture of thanks. Jake nodded and turned away, pointing his ship toward the next trade route. He had cargo to deliver and a living to make. Rescuing princesses was just something that happened sometimes when you traveled the stars. 3 months passed, and Jake tried to forget about the whole incident. He delivered cargo, picked up new contracts, and kept the Nightingale running smoothly. Lucas occasionally brought up that day, usually when they were sharing drinks in some port bar, but Jake always changed the subject. He'd done what needed doing, nothing more. The Nightingale was docked at Meridian Point, a bustling human commerce hub that served as a crossroads for a dozen trade routes. Jake was reviewing manifests for his next run when Lucas burst into the cargo bay, breathing hard like he'd been running. "Boss, we got a problem. A big one." Jake looked up from his datapad. "What kind of problem?" "Pirates. Station fees. That thing with the Centauri merchant we still haven't resolved. Worse. There's a Kryn diplomatic envoy docked here, and they're asking for you by name." Jake felt his stomach drop. He'd hoped that rescuing the princess would be the end of it. Apparently, the universe had other plans. Governor Paul Henderson himself contacted Jake within the hour, requesting his presence in the diplomatic wing. When a station governor asked, you didn't say no. Jake cleaned up as best he could and made his way through Meridian Point's crowded corridors to the diplomatic sector. The meeting room was impressive, all polished metal and soft lighting designed to make everyone feel important. Governor Henderson was there, looking nervous. Next to him stood Ambassador Victoria Lang, one of humanity's top diplomatic representatives. And across from them sat Grand Vizier Theron, a tall Kryn with ceremonial robes that probably cost more than Jake's entire ship. "Captain Morrison, please sit," Ambassador Lang said, gesturing to an empty chair. Jake sat, feeling distinctly out of place in his worn flight jacket among all these official people. Grand Vizier Theron spoke, his voice formal and precise. "Captain Morrison, the Kryn Empire has been searching for you for some time. Princess Arya Velshera wishes to express her gratitude for saving her life." "I'm glad she recovered," Jake said carefully. "But like I told the Admiral, I don't need any reward. I just did what was right." Theron's expression didn't change. "Captain, you may not be aware, but circumstances have changed significantly since your rescue of the princess. Emperor Velshera, her father, passed away suddenly 4 weeks ago. Princess Arya has ascended to the throne. She is now Queen Arya Velshera, ruler of the Kryn Empire." Jake blinked. That was news. Major news. "I'm sorry for her loss," he said, meaning it. "But that doesn't change anything. I still don't want payment." Ambassador Lang leaned forward. "Jake, it's not that simple. In Kryn culture, a life debt is sacred. The Queen must repay it, or her honor is questioned. And if you refuse, it's considered an insult not just to her, but to the entire empire." "That's ridiculous," Jake said flatly. "I'm not going to accept payment for saving someone's life. What kind of person would that make me?" "A practical one," Governor Henderson interjected. "Captain Morrison, the Kryn Empire is one of the most powerful political entities in this sector. Insulting them could have serious consequences for human relations." Theron nodded. "The Queen understands your position, Captain. She finds it admirable, even noble. But she cannot simply ignore the debt. It would weaken her position with the noble houses, especially so soon after taking the throne. Jake rubbed his face with both hands. This was getting complicated fast. So what are you saying? I have to accept something whether I want to or not. Essentially, yes, Ambassador Lang said. But perhaps we can find something that satisfies Kryn honor without compromising your principles. The Queen has invited you to the Kryn homeworld to discuss the matter personally. She wants me to travel all the way to the Kryn capital? Jake asked incredulously. She insists, Theron said. All expenses will be covered, of course. And she promises that whatever arrangement is made, it will be something you can accept with a clear conscience. Jake looked around the room at the expectant faces. He was a merchant captain, not a diplomat. He hauled cargo from point to point and tried to make enough profit to keep his ship flying. Now he was being asked to meet with a queen to discuss galactic politics and cultural obligations. Do I have a choice? He asked quietly. You always have a choice, Ambassador Lang said. But I strongly advise you to accept this invitation. Whatever the Queen is planning, refusing to even meet with her could damage human-Kryn relations for decades. Jake thought about his crew, about the thousands of human merchants who relied on peaceful relations with the Kryn Empire to do business. He thought about the princess, now queen, who'd looked at him with those golden eyes and silently thanked him. Fine, he said, standing up. I'll go. But I'm bringing Lucas with me, and the Nightingale stays under my control. I'm not walking into this blind. Theron actually smiled, the first real expression Jake had seen from him. Those terms are acceptable, Captain. We depart tomorrow morning. I think you will find Queen Arya to be quite understanding of your concerns. Jake left the diplomatic wing feeling like he'd just agreed to something that would change his life forever. Lucas was waiting outside, leaning against a wall with his arms crossed. So? Lucas asked. Pack a bag, Jake said. We're going to meet a queen. Lucas's eyes widened. You're serious? We're actually doing this? Apparently, I rescued the wrong person, Jake muttered. Or the right person at the wrong time. I'm still not sure which. The Kryn homeworld was beautiful in a way that made Jake uncomfortable. Everything was too perfect, too carefully designed. Towering structures of crystal and metal reached toward a sky that seemed perpetually sunset, colored in shades of purple and gold. The Grand Palace dominated the capital city, a massive complex that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Jake and Lucas were given rooms in the guest wing, spaces larger than the entire crew quarters on the Nightingale. Servants attended to their every need, which mostly meant Jake spent a lot of time politely asking them to leave him alone. He wasn't used to being treated like someone important. The formal reception was held in a hall that could have housed 3 merchant vessels. Hundreds of Kryn nobles attended, their scales shimmering under elaborate lighting as they whispered and watched the humans with barely concealed curiosity. Jake wore the best clothes he owned, which still felt shabby compared to the finery around him. High Chancellor Marcus Webb was there, representing the human government. He pulled Jake aside before the Queen arrived. Listen carefully, Morrison. You've stumbled into something bigger than you realize. The Queen is young, she's new to power, and she's facing opposition from traditionalist factions. How she handles this life-debt situation will be watched closely by every noble house in the Empire. I didn't ask for any of this, Jake said. No one ever does, Webb replied. But here we are. Be respectful, be honest, and for the love of everything, don't insult her in front of these people. Trumpet sounded, a haunting melody that silenced the entire hall. Queen Arya Velshera entered from a side door, and Jake finally got a good look at the woman he'd rescued. She was taller than him, as most Kryn were, with deep blue skin that seemed to shift shades in the light. Her golden eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as they swept across the assembled nobles. She wore robes of state that somehow managed to be both incredibly formal and practically designed. This was not someone who let ceremony get in the way of function. Her eyes found Jake in the crowd, and she smiled slightly. It was a small gesture, but Jake felt the tension in the room ease just a bit. The ceremony was long and filled with formal speeches that Jake barely understood. When it was finally his turn to approach, he walked to the base of the raised platform where the Queen sat and bowed awkwardly. He wasn't sure of the proper protocol, but it seemed like the thing to do. Captain Morrison, Queen Arya said, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "You saved my life when you had every reason to flee. You asked for nothing in return. Such honor is rare in any species." "I just did what was right, Your Majesty," Jake said. "Indeed. And now I must do what is right as well. I cannot leave a life debt unpaid, but you have made it clear that traditional payment is unacceptable to you. Therefore, I propose an alternative." Jake waited, aware that hundreds of eyes were watching this exchange. The Kryn Empire controls vast territories and numerous space lanes that are currently closed to human traffic. I propose a trade agreement, granting humanity exclusive access to these routes. This would open new markets, new opportunities, and strengthen the bond between our peoples. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jake heard Lucas inhale sharply beside him. This wasn't just generous. It was revolutionary. The economic impact would be enormous. However, the Queen continued, such an arrangement requires oversight. Someone who understands both human and Kryn interests, who can navigate the complexities of integrating our commercial systems. Captain Morrison, I ask that you serve as the official human liaison for this program. You would divide your time between your vessel and the Kryn homeworld, helping to establish protocols and resolve disputes. Jake stared at her. This was clever. She was offering something that would benefit all of humanity, making it nearly impossible for him to refuse without seeming selfish. But she was also asking for his time, his expertise, his life to change completely. "For how long?" he asked. "1 year," the Queen said. "After that, the program should be stable enough to run without your direct involvement. You would be free to return to your trading routes, knowing you helped build something lasting." Jake looked at Chancellor Webb, who was nodding encouragingly. He looked at Lucas, who shrugged in a way that said, "This is your call, boss." He looked back at the Queen, who watched him with those golden eyes that had silently thanked him 3 months ago. "I have conditions," Jake said, and the hall went silent. "I keep the Nightingale and my crew. I'm not giving up my ship or my independence. And if I see something wrong with how this program is being run, I can speak up without political consequences." Queen Arya smiled, a real smile this time. "Agreed. You would not be much use to me if you were simply another voice saying what I wish to hear. I need someone who will be honest, even when that honesty is uncomfortable." She stood and descended from the platform, approaching Jake directly. She extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement she'd clearly studied. Jake took it, and they shook. The crowd erupted in polite applause. Later, after the formal ceremony ended, Jake found himself in a smaller meeting room with just the Queen and Lady Sarah, her chief advisor. "You took a risk, accepting my proposal in front of everyone," Arya said, relaxed now without the formality. "You took a bigger risk making it," Jake replied. "I heard the whispers. Not everyone in that room was happy about humans getting access to Kryn space lanes." "Change always faces resistance," Arya said. "But you showed me something when you rescued me, Captain. You showed me that honor and courage exist beyond titles and treaties. If we can build understanding between our peoples, perhaps others will follow that example." Jake nodded slowly. "I'll do my best. But I'm a merchant, not a diplomat." "Perhaps that's exactly why you're the right person for this," Arya said. 6 months into the agreement, Jake had learned more about Kryn politics than he'd ever wanted to know. The trade program was succeeding beyond anyone's expectations. Human merchants were making fortunes in Kryn space, and Kryn goods were flowing into human markets at unprecedented rates. Danny Wright, a young trader who'd been struggling to keep his small ship running, now commanded a fleet of 3 vessels and couldn't stop thanking Jake every time they crossed paths. But success bred resentment. Jake sat in his office on Meridian Point, reviewing reports of another incident. A human cargo ship had been attacked near the Vex Corridor, a major trade route through Kryn space. The ship had been carrying medical supplies, and 3 crew members were dead. This was the 5th attack in 2 months, and a pattern was emerging. Lucas walked in without knocking, which meant trouble. "We got another one." The Starlight Dancer attacked just outside Kryn Station 7. They made it to port, but barely. Jake slammed his hand on the desk. "That's 6 ships. 6 ships in Kryn-controlled space, where we're supposed to be protected by the treaty. What are the Kryn authorities saying?" Same thing they always say. Pirates, unlucky timing, they're investigating. But Jake, I've been running the numbers. Every single attack happened in sectors where Counselor Vex has military oversight. Counselor Vex was one of the most vocal opponents of the human trade program. He'd argued against it from the beginning, claiming that humans would bring chaos and corruption to Kryn space. Jake had met him twice, and both times had felt like he was being measured for a coffin. That's a serious accusation, Jake said quietly. You're suggesting a Kryn counselor is ordering attacks on human ships? I'm suggesting we look into it, Lucas said. Because if we don't, more people are going to die. Jake made a decision. Get me a meeting with Captain Ryan Foster. If anyone in the Kryn military will listen, it's him. Ryan Foster commanded the Royal Guard, the elite force responsible for protecting the Queen and investigating threats to the Empire. He was also one of the few Kryn officials who'd supported the trade program from the start. Jake had worked with him on security protocols, and they developed a mutual respect. They met in a secure location, a private room in a station that catered to both species. Ryan listened as Jake laid out the evidence, his expression growing darker with each detail. These attack locations, the timing, the targets, they all point to someone with inside knowledge of human shipping schedules and Kryn patrol routes, Jake said. And they all happened in Vex sectors. Ryan was silent for a long moment. What you're suggesting could start a civil war. Vex has powerful allies among the traditionalist houses. If we accuse him without absolute proof, it could tear the Empire apart. And if we do nothing, the trade program collapses and people keep dying, Jake countered. I didn't come this far to watch it all fall apart because we were too afraid to act. You sound like the Queen, Ryan said with a slight smile. She said almost the same thing when she decided to arrest the conspirators who tried to block her coronation. They worked together over the next 2 weeks, carefully gathering evidence. Ryan used his authority to access military records, while Jake talked to human merchants who'd survived attacks or witnessed suspicious activity. The picture that emerged was damning. Vex wasn't just opposing the trade program politically. He was actively sabotaging it, using hired pirates to attack human ships while making it look like random violence. He'd embezzled military funds to pay for the attacks, and he'd falsified patrol reports to cover his tracks. But they needed more than evidence. They needed Vex to make a mistake. Jake came up with a plan, and Ryan agreed after considerable argument. They leaked information about a high-value human cargo ship carrying rare medical technology, something that would be an irresistible target. The ship's route would take it directly through Vex territory. The cargo ship was actually crewed by Ryan's best soldiers in disguise, and Jake's Nightingale shadowed it from a distance with sensors running hot. The trap worked perfectly. Pirates attacked the cargo ship, and Jake's sensors recorded everything, including the encrypted communications between the pirates and a source that traced directly back to Vex's private command center. They brought the evidence to Queen Arya in a private meeting. Jake watched as she reviewed the data, her expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, her eyes were hard. "This is treason," she said quietly. "Vex has betrayed the Empire, endangered our alliance with humanity, and caused the deaths of innocents." "The question is what you do about it," Jake said. "Ryan says arresting Vex could cause political chaos. But letting him continue will destroy everything we've built." Arya stood and walked to the window overlooking the capital. "When you rescued me, Captain Morrison, I was helpless, injured, dependent on the kindness of a stranger. I swore then that I would never be helpless again, that I would never let fear or politics stop me from doing what was right." She turned back to face them. "Arrest Counselor Vex and everyone involved in this conspiracy. Do it publicly. Let every house and every citizen see that treason has consequences, regardless of political connections." The arrests happened at dawn. Vex and 14 other officials were taken into custody by the Royal Guard. The evidence was presented to the High Council within hours. The traditionalist faction screamed about political persecution, but the proof was undeniable. Queen Arya addressed the Empire that evening, her speech broadcast across every Kryn world. She spoke of honor, of justice, of the trust between allies being sacred. She spoke of Jake, the human who'd asked for nothing but had given everything to make the alliance work. The political fallout was intense, but Arya stood firm. 3 counselors resigned in protest. Two noble houses withdrew their support from the throne. But the majority of Kryn citizens, seeing the evidence and hearing their queen's passionate defense, supported her decision. Jake watched the speech from his quarters on the Nightingale, which was docked at the palace station. When it ended, Lucas whistled low. "She bet everything on doing the right thing," Lucas said. "Yeah," Jake agreed. "Just like someone else I know." 1 year after rescuing Princess Arya from that damaged ship, Jake stood on the bridge of the Nightingale and looked at the calendar. His term as liaison was officially ending today. The trade program was thriving, with new routes opening every month and a permanent oversight committee established to handle disputes. He'd done what he'd promised to do. So why did leaving feel wrong? The past year had been the most challenging of his life, but also the most rewarding. He'd built something that mattered, something bigger than profit margins and cargo manifests. And he'd gotten to know Arya, not as a queen, but as a person. They'd shared meals and arguments, laughed at cultural misunderstandings, and worked side by side to solve problems that seemed impossible. His communication panel beeped. It was Ryan Foster, and he sounded urgent. "Jake, we have a situation." Long-range sensors picked up a massive fleet heading toward Kryn space. It's the same pirate coalition that attacked the princess a year ago, except now they've got 3 times as many ships. Jake felt his blood run cold. How long until they reach Kryn territory? 18 hours. Maybe less if they push their engines. "Jake, there's something else." "We intercepted communications between the pirates and someone inside the capital. The remaining members of Vex faction are planning a coup. When the pirates attack, they'll sabotage our defenses from within." "Where's the queen?" Jake demanded. "In the palace, surrounded by guards we're not sure we can trust. The conspirators are moving tonight. If they succeed, the empire falls apart and the trade program dies with it." Jake was already running calculations. "Get me a secure channel to every human merchant ship in Kryn space. I don't care if they're hauling cargo or sitting in port, I need them ready to fly in 30 minutes. "Jake, what are you planning?" "Something stupid," Jake said. "Which means it might actually work." Within an hour, Jake had assembled a fleet of 47 human merchant vessels. They weren't warships, but they were fast, maneuverable, and their captains were all people who'd prospered because of the trade program. When Jake explained the situation, every single one of them volunteered. Danny Wright's voice came over the comm, excited and nervous. "Jake, my ships aren't equipped for combat. We haul freight, not fight battles." "I know," Jake said. "But we're not going to fight them head-on. We're going to do what humans do best. We're going to improvise." Jake sent encrypted messages to Ryan with his plan, then pointed the Nightingale toward the Kryn homeworld at maximum speed. The merchant fleet followed, a ragtag armada of cargo haulers and transport ships racing to save an empire. The battle, when it came, was chaos. The pirate fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly where intelligence had predicted, confident and aggressive. The Kryn defense fleet moved to intercept, but Jake could see the sabotage immediately. Ships that should have been in position were out of formation. Communication channels were jammed. Someone had done their job well. That's when Jake's merchant fleet arrived, not from the expected vector but from above the orbital plane, using a trick he'd learned hauling cargo through asteroid fields. The pirates weren't expecting civilians to join the fight. They certainly weren't expecting those civilians to dump their cargo holds as improvised mines. Thousands of shipping containers tumbled through space, each one a potential collision hazard. The pirate formation broke apart trying to avoid them, and in that moment of confusion, the Kryn defense fleet struck hard. Ryan had taken Jake's intelligence and arrested the traitors within the military. The real Kryn commanders were now in control. Jake's ships darted in and out of the battle, too small and too fast to target easily, creating chaos wherever they went. The Nightingale led them, and Jake flew like he'd never flown before. A pirate cruiser tried to line up a shot, and Jake dumped half his remaining cargo directly into their path. The cruiser sensors went haywire trying to track multiple targets, and a Kryn destroyer took it apart with precise fire. The battle turned into a rout. The pirates had expected an easy victory against a sabotaged defense force. Instead, they faced a united front of Kryn military precision and human unpredictability. Within 3 hours, Half the pirate fleet was destroyed and the rest were fleeing back into deep space. But the fight wasn't over. Jake received an emergency transmission from the palace. The conspirators had made their move, trying to seize control while everyone was distracted by the space battle. Queen Arya was trapped in the throne room with a handful of loyal guards, surrounded by traitors. Jake didn't hesitate. He took the Nightingale straight down through the atmosphere, ignoring every safety protocol and traffic control warning. Lucas held on to his station and prayed they wouldn't burn up on entry. They landed hard in the palace courtyard, and Jake was running before the engines fully shut down. He had a pistol he'd never expected to use and absolutely no plan beyond getting to Arya. The palace was in chaos. Royal guards fought each other in the halls as loyalties divided. Jake followed the sound of weapons fire, taking corridors he'd learned during his year as liaison. He found the throne room doors sealed, with armed conspirators trying to cut through. "Hey!" Jake shouted, and they turned to see a human in a pilot's jacket pointing a gun at them with absolutely insane confidence. The fight was brief and desperate. Jake was outnumbered, but he had surprise on his side and a willingness to cheat that made the formal combat training of the conspirators useless. He grabbed a dropped weapon, used a tapestry as a shield, and generally made a nuisance of himself until Ryan arrived with loyal guards. They breached the throne room together. Arya stood at the center, her robes torn but her head high, surrounded by wounded guards who'd refused to abandon her. The leader of the conspirators, a high-ranking noble named Keth, held a weapon pointed at her. "It's over, Keth," Ryan said. "The pirate fleet is destroyed, your allies are captured, and you're alone." Keth laughed bitterly. "If I'm going to fall, she falls with me." Jake didn't think. He just moved, throwing himself between Keth and Arya as the weapon fired. The impact spun him around, and he hit the floor hard. The pain came a second later, white-hot across his shoulder. Ryan's guards took Keth down. Arya dropped to her knees beside Jake, her hands pressing against his wound. "You fool," she said, and Jake wasn't sure if she was angry or crying. "Maybe both." "You complete fool. Why would you do that?" "Same reason I rescued you the first time," Jake managed through gritted teeth. "Right thing to do." The next few hours were a blur of medical treatment and debriefing. Helen had come down from the Nightingale and patched Jake up with the same efficiency she'd shown treating Arya a year ago. The wound was painful but not serious. He'd been lucky. 3 days later, Jake stood in the same hall where he'd first been honored, though this time there was no ceremony. Just him and Arya, talking quietly while the palace staff cleaned up the damage from the coup attempt. "The pirate threat is eliminated, the conspirators are in custody, and the trade program is stronger than ever," Arya said. "I believe that constitutes the life debt being fully repaid, Captain Morrison." Jake nodded. "I suppose it does. You're free to return to your trading routes. No more obligations, no more duties to the Empire. Just your ship and the stars, as you wanted." "Yeah," Jake said. "About that. I've been thinking. The trade program still needs oversight. There are going to be new challenges, new problems. And I kind of like it here." Arya smiled. "Are you saying you want to stay?" "I'm saying I want to establish a permanent trading company based here in Kryn space. Still independent, still my ship, but operating out of your territory. Maybe helping other merchants get started, maybe solving problems before they become crises." "And this has nothing to do with the people you've met here?" Jake grinned. "Maybe a little. I've gotten used to having friends in high places." "Friends," Arya repeated. "I like that. Not subjects or allies or diplomatic contacts. Friends." "Friends," Jake agreed. "No debts, no obligations. Just people who respect each other and want to build something good." Arya extended her hand, and Jake took it. They shook, and it felt like sealing a promise. From the doorway, Lucas watched with Danny Wright, who'd come to the palace to check on Jake. "Think he knows he's the luckiest guy in the galaxy?" Danny asked. "Oh, he knows," Lucas said. "But the thing about Jake is, he makes his own luck. He just does the right thing and somehow it all works out." 6 months later, the Morrison Trading Company operated out of a new station built at the junction of human and Kryn space. It was a joint project, a symbol of cooperation that employed both species and served as a model for future collaboration. Jake split his time between the station and traveling the trade routes, solving disputes and opening new markets. He visited the Kryn homeworld regularly, always welcomed at the palace. Sometimes it was business, sometimes just meals with friends. Arya had become one of the most respected leaders in the sector, known for her fairness and her willingness to take bold chances on peace. And it all started because one merchant captain saw a distress signal and decided that helping someone was more important than staying safe. He'd never asked for payment for rescuing the Princess Queen. But what he'd received, friendship and purpose and a place where he belonged, was worth more than any treasure in the galaxy.